Okay, so another week, another WandaVision episode to review and break down for all of you lovely viewers at home. This 90s, early 2000s style episode, titled All New Halloween Spooktacular, takes a radical spin on what we've seen in the previous 5 episodes, both in tone and in terms of techniques used to match the feel of the cringy but trying to be cool 90s sitcom, of which it actually pulls off flawlessly. This episode is very on the nose with its references, callbacks and self-awareness. So with all of that yet to unpack, let's get into it. Let's start off with the episode recap, which you will have just seen a minute ago before the intro. The recap itself is nothing special, but it does feature something pretty awesome, as we see shots of Pietro, the real Pietro, #neverforget, from Avengers Age of Ultron. Although it's already existing footage, this is still the first time we've seen Aaron Taylor Johnson in an MCU project since the film in 2015. Moving on to the intro for this episode, where, like the other episode's intros, we get some lyrics that also allude to the fabrication of Westview, such as, "But if it's all an illusion, sit back, enjoy the show." We see the twins Billy and Tommy take charge of this intro as they run around with an old video camera, filming some of the cast, which the adults of the house don't seem too happy about. Well, apart from Pietro, but let's face it, he's probably more immature than the twins. As the twins show us the characters, their names appear on the screen, like Wanda Maximoff, The Vision, Agnes, Tommy Maximoff, and Billy Maximoff. But, strangely, when Pietro shows up, it says Pietro Maximoff as himself, which is weird. Like, it suggests that he's not really there, and maybe he's more of a character than a real person. This intro definitely sets the tone for the rest of the episode, which looks to be inspired by Malcolm in the Middle. In this episode, we get a lot of Billy and Tommy talking to the camera, and referring to us, the spectators, in a similar way that Malcolm does in Malcolm in the Middle. This episode is obviously set during Halloween, which gives Marvel a chance to dress up our beloved characters in their classic comic book costumes, which looked kinda goofy, but still really awesome somehow. Though, of course, in MCU canon, these characters can't exactly be dressed up as their own comic counterparts. So, for example, Wanda's costume is of a Sokovian fortune teller, and Vision's is a Mexican wrestler. Pietro tells Wanda that her costume is lame, but still better than the costumes their mum made them when they were kids. We then get a delightfully strange flashback to the two of them as kids, in Sokovia, dressed up as what looks to be Nick Fury and Black Widow, for some reason, I don't know. And they get a fish from an old lady instead of sweets, so it's pretty funny. What's interesting about this though is the exchange between Wanda and Pietro afterwards. Vision then enters and we can see that there's still a lot of underlying tension between him and Wanda, as he lies to her about working for the neighborhood watch that night, which is a callback to episode 2, so he can get away and investigate the strange happenings in Westview. Pietro then says that he'll look after the kids and runs off with Tommy and dresses them both up in classic Quicksilver costumes. While out trick-or-treating, we see that after last week's observation by Vision that there are no children in Westview, the town is now filled with kids and other adults that we've never seen before, just roaming the streets. The boys run off and get some sweets as Pietro says something that caught my attention.
Unleash hell, demon spawn!
Now this is an interesting one because we've been speculating for weeks about the demon Mephisto's involvement, and he plays a huge part in Billy and Tommy's origin, so could this line be hinting at that? Another thing that is quite prominent in this episode is Wanda's skepticism towards Pietro. She goes on to test him with a question about their childhood, but he doesn't answer and instead calls her out on it, pointing out himself that he knows he looks different and hints at it being Wanda's doing, in the sense that she's found happiness and probably doesn't want to be reminded of the past, which, to be honest, makes a lot of sense. There's also a really funny reference in this scene where both Tommy and Wanda at some point both say kick ass, which of course is a reference to both Quicksilvers, Evan Peters and Aaron Taylor Johnson, being in the Kick-Ass movie, with Taylor Johnson being Kick-Ass himself. Tommy and Pietro then both say, "I feel the need for speed," as they run off, which of course is another reference, this time to Tommy's superhero alias, Speed. We also see the return of everyone's favourite Westview resident, Herb, who's working for the neighbourhood watch when Wanda goes over to talk to him, as Pietro and the twins zip around the place causing all sorts of havoc. At which point Herb says, "Is there something I can do for you, Wanda? Do you want something changed?" Which has got to be a result of her mind control and how Herb seems to be almost aware of it, or at least more so than others. We then catch up with Vision as he explores the far reaches of Westview, where he's scoping the place out for any unusual activity, and oh boy does he find some. He starts off by seeing a woman and a man repeating small segments of activities, like putting down a pumpkin and then picking it back up again, or hanging up some Halloween decorations and then taking them down again. As the activity goes on and on and on, we see a stream of tears slowly slide down the woman's face while she remains totally expressionless. Two things are clear from this moment. One, people are clearly in pain and feeling some sort of trauma through this experience. And two, it seems that the further away you go from Wanda and the centre of Westview, the weaker the connection is. Or maybe just the less Wanda tries. Hence the glitching. The glitch in the Matrix stuff gets worse and worse as Vision gets closer to the edge of Westview, and it's not long before he finds people totally frozen in place. We then see him change back into his true form and fly up to scope out Westview as a whole, where he finds Agnes sitting in a car acting weirdly. Well, more than usual anyway. So Vision frees her mind just like he did to Norm last week, where we then get a very interesting conversation between the two of them, where she mentions him being an Avenger and the fact that he's dead, of which Vision knows neither of those things, adding more proof to his statement last week that he can't remember who he is or his life before Westview. Agnes, dressed like a witch for Halloween, then goes on to manically cackle before Vision restores her back to her entranced state, where she then drives away. Back with Wanda and Pietro, we see them talking about what happened to him, and he says, "I got shot like a chump on the street for no reason at all, and the next thing I know, I hear you calling me." Which could actually mean that maybe this is the original Pietro reincarnated in a new body, which would make sense because his old one would be decayed by now. So whether this is some random person's body, or a resident of Westview's body, or even the body of another Pietro from the multiverse, it seems that this could well be our Pietro back from the dead, meaning that we could see Quicksilver's full-time return to the MCU sometime soon. The kids then run back to Wanda and Pietro, as we see that Tommy has unlocked his super speed ability, just like his uncle and his dad. Later on, we see Pietro sit down with Wanda for another chat, where he starts to act a little more suspiciously, by asking her how she managed to pull this off, and where she's been hiding all the kids, and uses the fact that he's her brother to gain this information. In fact, he even compliments her for making all of this happen. I do have another theory on this that I won't dive into now, but you can check it out at the Twitter, at Geeks of the Multiverse. The link will be in the description below. Another huge moment in this scene that's worth talking about is something that's very similar to what we saw at the end of, I believe it was episode 4, when Wanda saw the Vision corpse, but this time we see her look over to Pietro as she sees his corpse with the bullet holes in the torso and a really pale face that altogether just, well it's just creepy, alright? But I guess that's probably the point. Now remember when we were talking about Vision? Well, before we get on to what he does next, that leads on to the huge ending, let's jump back over into the real world and talk about S.W.O.R.D. and what they're up to in this episode. Following last week's episode and the events that transpired between Wanda and S.W.O.R.D., Director Hayward is now driving the mission even further, switching from monitoring the situation to eliminating Wanda Maximoff, and therefore eliminating the threat. Monica, Darcy and Jimmy all disagree with him and therefore get kicked off the project and escorted out. It just so happens that they manage to beat the crap out of the S.W.O.R.D. agents, steal their uniforms and stick around for a little while longer. They poke around a little more and find out that Director Hayward found a way of monitoring Westview but didn't tell them, and he's using this technology to keep a closer eye on Vision for whatever reason that may be. Kinda sus? Yeah, I think so. We also find out that Monica's blood test results came in from last week. It turns out that being inside the Hex has permanently altered her cells on a molecular level. Now, this is likely what will lead to her getting her powers and becoming Photon. But people are also thinking that this could be a means to creating the mutant gene. Monica and Jimmy then leave Darcy behind while they drive off to meet Monica's aerospace engineer contact, so that he can give her a hex-proof tank, which we'll see next week and find out who her mystery guy really is. All three storylines then converge in a huge ending to the episode, which sees Vision pushing his way through the Hex walls and struggling to come out the other side in the real world. It's actually quite a heartbreaking scene as we see him slowly flake apart as his life force is tethered to Westview. S.W.O.R.D. operatives let this happen and they don't even attempt to help him as he screams out in immense pain, begging them to help not him, but the people inside Westview. Darcy then blows her cover and reveals herself to be still there at the sword base, as she runs out telling them to help him, but all they do is handcuff her to a car and watch him die. We then cut back to Billy in Westview as his powers start to emerge. He hears what's happening all the way from the centre of Westview and uses another power to stop his brother Tommy from running around. They both run back to Wanda and he tells her what he senses. Pietro then jokes by saying, "Hey, don't sweat it, sis. It's not like your dead husband can die twice," which she does not like at all and sends him flying back with an energy beam. Wanda then brings everything and everyone inside Westview to a halt, as she uses an immense amount of power to expand the hex walls further out, bringing Vision back in and therefore saving his life, but also bringing in almost all of the sword agents at the base and even the base itself, transforming everything to fit her perfect little world. Westview is now bigger than ever, and this is where the episode ends, so there's no telling how far she stretches the hex out. Now, before I end this long ass video, there is one last thing I need to mention. Like always, there was an ad break in this episode. Now, this ad break is unlike any other we've seen in any previous episodes, because not only is it animated, but it's also not something related to her past, which may have caused her trauma. Instead, it's a product called Yo Magic, of which, as you saw, the shark was feeding on. In case you still don't get it, snacked on your magic. Like, come on. It's pretty obvious that this is a clue that someone is feeding off Wanda's magic, and perhaps even creating situations for her to use her powers even more. Someone like, oh, I don't know, Mephisto? Okay, so there you have it. WandaVision episode 6 is done. I really like this episode. Pietro was definitely a standout in this episode, and since appearing last week, has spawned so many theories in my brain, theories that you can find on the Geeks the Multiverse Twitter, which will be linked down below in my link tree. So if you're a fan of the channel, then please make sure to check that out because I'm quite active on there and post loads of cool theories and also comic reviews like I'm currently reading through DC's Future State event. But anyway, back onto WandaVision. So, with only 3 episodes left, I'm very hyped for what's to come, but that's still a week away, so until then, I have been Brandon, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw here today, then maybe consider subscribing to catch our other content as and when it releases.